The doctors had already stepped back. The monitors were silent. The room had gone still in the way rooms only go. Still when everyone present has accepted that there is nothing left to do. A man in a suit stood against the wall with his hands over his mouth. A senior physician pointed toward the door. A nurse looked at the floor. The baby had stopped breathing 4 minutes. Go and every attempt to revive him had failed. Then a boy in a torn gray shirt pushed through the door. Nobody noticed him at first. He was maybe 11 years old, small for his age, with muddy shoes and the kind of quietness that comes from spending too much time being invisible. He had followed the ambulance on foot from 3 blocks away because he had seen the father running, and something told him to run too. He reached the sink before anyone could stop him. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be debated, documented, and replayed in that hospital for years. Before we begin, if you believe that courage has no address and kindness wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to WhatsApp Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. The boy's name was Kyle. He was 11 years old, and he had been living without a permanent home for 8 months. Not on the streets entirely, but close enough. He moved between a church shelter that closed at 7 in the morning and a dry space, beneath an overpass that he had made as close to a room as a person can make a concrete ceiling and a cardboard floor. He had a backpack with 3 items in it: a change of socks, a photograph of his mother, a small book about the human body that he had found in a donation, been outside a clinic 2 years ago and had read so many times the spine had split. That book is important. Remember it. Kale had been curious about medicine since he was 6 years old, when his younger sister stopped breathing for almost a minute, during a severe allergic reaction, and a paramedic had arrived and brought her back with calm hands and precise movements that looked to Kale like the most important thing he had ever witnessed a human being do. He decided that day that he wanted to understand the body, how it worked. What could go wrong? What could fix it? Without school access, without a library card that stayed valid when you had no fixed address, he read whatever he could find: donated medical pamphlets, outdated textbooks left outside campus buildings, that battered book about the human body which explained, in a chapter on infant emergencies, what to do when a baby inhaled water or fluid, and the airway needed to be cleared before the lungs could restart. He had read that chapter many times. He had never imagined he would need it. The morning it happened began like most of Kale's mornings. He was sitting near the entrance of a park 2 blocks from the hospital, eating half a granola bar he had saved from the shelter the night before, watching the city arrive at itself. He noticed the man first. Expensive suit, running in a way that men in expensive suits almost never run, with total abandon, with no awareness of who was watching, because something had overridden everything except the emergency. The man was carrying a small bundle against his chest. Kale stood up. He did not know why exactly, he just did. He followed. The hospital entrance was 3 blocks away. By the time Kale arrived, the man had already been taken through the emergency doors. Kale slipped in behind a family entering through the same entrance and followed the sound of raised voices down a corridor and through a set of doors that were still swinging. He came into the room just as the senior physician was raising his hand and saying the words no parent is ever prepared to hear. The baby, 8 months old, had been found unresponsive at home. The preliminary assessment suggested he had inhaled fluid while in a bouncy seat that had tilted during a brief moment. His father was in the next room. By the time the father found him, too much time had passed. The team had worked for 4 minutes on arrival with no response. The man in the suit, the father, was pressed against the wall. His name was Garrison Vale. He was the founder of one of the largest private investment firms in the state. He had never once in his adult life encountered a problem that money could not eventually solve. He was completely helpless. And then a boy in a torn gray shirt reached the sink. Kale had seen something the moment he entered the room. A faint movement. The smallest possible twitch in the baby's fingers. So small that everyone else had moved past it. He did not stop to explain. He did not ask permission. He crossed the room, gently but without hesitation, lifted the infant, and positioned him face up under a slow stream of cool water the way the book had described, supporting the head and neck precisely, angling the body to let gravity help the airway clear. That is when the physician pointed at him and shouted. That is when the man in the suit said, "What are you doing?" That is when the nurse moved toward him. Cale did not let go. He said, quietly and without turning around, "Please just give me 1 minute." Something in his voice stopped the room. Not authority, not volume, something else. The particular steadiness of a person who is not performing confidence, but actually has it, earned through 2 years of reading the same chapter over and over in a concrete space beneath an overpass because the body fascinated him, and knowledge was the one thing no circumstance had been able to take away. 40 seconds passed. Then the baby coughed, then cried. Then the room collapsed into motion all at once. Doctors rushing forward, monitors being reattached, the nurse who had been moving toward Cale stopping completely still with her hand over her heart. Garrison Vale slid down the wall until he was sitting on the hospital floor with his face in his hands, making a sound that was not quite crying and not quite anything else. Cale set the baby gently on the examination table, stepped back, and picked up his backpack from where he had dropped it by the door. He was almost in the hallway before Garrison looked up and said, "Wait, before we continue, we want to stop here. Because what Cale did in that room is the most visible part of this story. But Kindness Tales wants you to know what made it possible." 2 years before that morning, a clinic volunteer named Dorothy had left a box of donated books outside the building at the end of a long shift. She did not sort through them carefully. She did not think about who might pick them up. She simply left them rather than throwing them away, because throwing away books felt wrong to her. Cale found that box at 6:30 in the morning. He took one book. A retired paramedic named Harold ran informal first aid sessions at the church shelter on the second Sunday of each month. He let anyone attend. He did not check whether attendees had a home address. Cale came to 3 of those sessions. Harold showed the group how the human airway works and what position matters most when an infant cannot breathe. Harold never knew Cale's name. Cale never forgot what Harold taught. A shelter supervisor named Irene let Cale stay an extra 40 minutes past closing on cold mornings when she could tell he had nowhere warm to go. She never noted it in the register. She just did not lock the door until he had finished whatever he was reading. None of these people were in that hospital room. All of them were. This is what Kindness Tales believes. That every act of human decency travels further than the person who gave it will ever know. Dorothy's box of books. Harold's second Sunday sessions. Irene's unlocked door. They all arrived in that room with Cale. Garrison Vale found Cale in the corridor. He had left his infant son in the care of the medical team, followed the boy into the hallway, and stood before him with an expression that had nothing practiced in it, nothing managed, just a man who had been to the edge of the worst moment of his life and come back because a child in a torn shirt had refused to accept what everyone else had already accepted. He asked Cale where he lived. Cale told him the truth. Garrison did not react with pity or with the particular discomfort that people sometimes display when poverty arrives close enough to feel real. He asked Cale 2 more questions. What do you want to do with your life? And what do you need to do it? Cale answered both. The arrangement that followed was not charity. Garrison was clear about that from the beginning, and Cale was clear that he would not have accepted it as such. It was investment. Garrison had spent 20 years identifying people who had something rare and making it possible for that thing to grow. He had simply never before found that person in a hospital corridor at 11 years old with a split-spined book in a backpack. Cale was enrolled in school within the month. He lived with a foster family that Garrison's foundation had supported for years. A couple named the Okafor Brennans, who had 3 other children and a loud kitchen, and the kind of home where the front door was always unlocked because someone was always arriving. He was given access to a tutor twice a week, a library card, a winter coat. He asked if he could keep the book about the human body. Nobody had ever suggested he couldn't. 4 years later, Cale was the top science student in his school. He attended a regional medical symposium at 14 as the only middle school participant. He sat in the front row and asked 2 questions that the presenting physician later described to a colleague as the most precise questions anyone had asked all day. Garrison's son, now 5 years old, called Cale by a nickname that had developed over years of visits and could not quite be translated into adult language. What it meant, roughly, was the person who stayed. Because that is what Cale had done. When everyone else stepped back, he stayed. The night before Cale's first day of high school, he sat at the Okafor Brennan kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to Garrison, not to the doctors. He wrote it to Dorothy, whose full name he had eventually learned by tracing the clinic donation box back to its source. He wrote it to Harold the paramedic, now retired to a smaller town 2 hours away. He wrote it to Irene, the shelter supervisor. He told them what their small decisions had made possible. Dorothy wrote back within the week. She said she had not thought about that box of books in 2 years and had cried for 20 minutes after reading his letter, and then called her sister to read it again. Harold wrote back on paper so old it had yellowed at the edges and said that he had taught those second Sunday sessions for 11 years, and this was the first time he had ever heard what happened after. Irene did not write back. But the shelter director told Cale months later that Irene had framed the letter and hung it on the wall beside the door she used to leave unlocked on cold mornings. The door she still left unlocked. Never count out a person because of where they are sleeping tonight. Never assume that because someone has nothing, they know nothing. Never mistake quietness for emptiness or worn shoes for a small life. And never forget that the knowledge which saves a life might live in a book left in a box on a pavement by someone who simply could not bring herself to throw it away. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe in people today. Subscribe to